Hello, this is Joseph Drust, and welcome to another video inside Z Classroom. In this video, I'll be covering ZRemesher, one of the new features inside of ZBrush 406. ZRemesher is an automatic retopology tool that generates topology based on the sculptural qualities of your mesh. This feature is extremely fast and generates topology that looks like it was manually created. To start off, here we have one example of a model created by Jason Martin that has been ZRemeshed. The model on the left here is the final model that was been decimated down to around 1 million polygons. With a simple click of ZRemesher inside of ZBrush 406, the model is automatically retopologized. Here we have 3 examples of the model's automatically generated topology in varying polygon levels. So we have 45,000, 20,000, and 14,000. Once again, this topology was not manually created using the topology tools in ZBrush or by a Z-sphere retopology, but with just one single click of a button inside of ZBrush. Now here we have a second example here of a model using ZRemesher. This is a bug insect, and it started out here as 9 million polygons. And then with one single click of a button inside of ZBrush, clicking the ZRemesher button, it has now been retopologized down to 17,000, 4,000, or even 1,300. So one single click inside of ZBrush and you're getting this fantastic result of retopology from a model that literally started with millions and millions of polygons. So normally when I do a video here on Z Classroom, I usually have a model that's already kind of created and I go through the process of showing you guys how to make it. In this one, for the showing off ZRemesher, I wanted to start with a model to ZRemesh that everybody has. So if you own a copy of ZBrush, you have the access to this model. So I'm just going to load one in from Lightbox. So to get to Lightbox, just hit comma and it will open up Lightbox up here. And then I'm going to come over here and click on the tool menu up here, and you're going to get a list of the ZTLs that are stored in the tool folder on your computer. Now I'm going to come over here to the Z-Sketch bug model, and I'm just going to double click that, and that's going to load it in over here on your tool palette. And then I'm going to hit comma again to hide Lightbox, and now I'm simply just going to draw this out on my screen. So just left clicking and dragging it out. Once it's drawn out, just come up here and click edit or hit T, and now your model's in edit mode. Now this model shipped with ZBrush to demonstrate the Z-Sketch functionality. So if you come in here to your tool menu and go down to Z-Sketch, you'll see that edit sketch is turned on. So if you turn that off, you see the actual Z-sphere armature underneath. We need to actually take this and turn it into a polygonal mesh so we can actually use ZRemesher with it. So to do that quick, we're going to come over here to the unified skin panel, and we're going to change this resolution to 512 and hit enter. And then we're going to hit make unified skin. And this is going to give us a new mesh model that's around, say, 230,000 polygons. And it's going to be, the density, kind of holds some of the details, and we can actually start breaking down the functionality of ZRemesher. This may take a little time. You'll see it says optimizing volume up here. So if it hangs or anything, just look up there, but it's usually pretty fast. So now that we have that processed, we made it a unified skin. It's actually generated a new tool over here, and you can see it's prefixed with the word skin. So if we click on that, we now have the model selected that actually is made up of polygonal data. So this allows us, if we had any of our standard brushes kind of selected here, we could actually sculpt on this model right now. Our next thing we want to do is we have a bunch of polygroups on here that actually transferred over from the actual Z-Sketch. So I just want to make this entire model one polygroup. So I'm going to come over here to the polygroup tab, and I'm just going to do a group visible, and it's going to turn everything one single polygroup. So now we're ready to show off some of the functionalities of ZRemesher. ZRemesher is actually located in the tool palette, and if you go to geometry and open that up, there's a tab here called ZRemesher, and if you click that, you just see this large ZRemesher button right here. Now 90% of the time, you're probably just going to come here, use the default settings, and just click ZRemesh. This is going to analyze your model based on the actual sculptural details of it. So if you have like eyeballs or things like that, it's actually going to try to hold the topology around those items that are sculpted in on your model. So for this guy, you're going to see it's actually going to try to hold all these rings around the sides here. And same with like the parts on the arms and different divisions on the legs and stuff. And try to hold that detail to kind of correspond with the high-res version. Now, there was no pausing in this video here, nothing. So this whole process for this model took 22 seconds. So in 22 seconds, I went from that 202 5,000 polygon model to a 14,000 model. And you can see here it actually held, all that kind of sculptural detail that I had in. So, it kept these kind of areas in the thorax or the abdomen stuff, and then it, kept the divisions of the arms and all the different kind of elements, even the wings all the way down. And the topology is very clean. Like if you rotate around this, I mean, it looks like it was manually created, and it was created in 20 some seconds with just one single click of a button. So extremely powerful here. Now, one thing you may notice on this right out the start is that the symmetry, there is really no symmetry in here, and this is because I did not have symmetry turned on before I actually hit the ZRemesh button. So one thing nice about ZRemesher is you can demo this all live, and you don't have to pause the video at any point just because of the speed of it. It's so fast. So I'm just going to undo and get back to my 203,000 point model here, and I'm just going to turn symmetry on. So if you hit X, it's actually going to activate symmetry on your model. You can also come up here to the transform palette, and right here there's this button called activate symmetry. So right now I have symmetry on the X, which means that the model is pretty much split down the middle, so if I sculpt it on this side, it would sculpt on the other side there. Now, ZRemesher has two functionalities for the actual using symmetry when you actually press the button. The first one, which I'm going to show you the different ones here, so we'll just do the first one first. So just literally with symmetry on, just click the ZRemesher button. And this process is the symmetry version of ZRemesher, the first version. We'll see how this generates here. And once again, this is extremely fast for the amount of quality it gives off. So here we have the first version of symmetry here. So you can see there is a little bit kind of wonkiness nature here on the his tail end here, but everything else looks pretty good. We can spin it around and look at all the stuff here. We have a nice symmetry line down the middle of the model. Everything looks symmetrical all over the place, and the polygon flow still stays consistent from what we had originally. So really nice. Now I'm just going to make a copy of this. I'm just going to move the model here inside, hit Shift S, which does a snapshot of the model, and then just drag a new model over here. And now I'm going to undo this to get back to that original version. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run ZRemesher with the second option for using symmetry. And this is done by holding the Alt key, and while you're holding the Alt key, click the ZRemesher button. So this does a different algorithm to generate a symmetrical model using ZRemesher. So if you find that, say, this version of your symmetrical model you didn't like, so say you didn't really like this kind of area in here, you can hold Alt and it's going to do a different kind of algorithm on it and process it differently. So here we have the version of the model again using Alt plus clicking the ZRemesher button, and you can see that kind of area in here that was giving maybe some results you did not want is now gone. So really neat way to kind of vary the difference of your model. If you have symmetry on a model and you find that you don't like the original version, hold Alt, click ZRemesher, and you'll get a second algorithm for the actual symmetry modifier. So this one actually looks really good here. That's a pretty good example, and you can definitely see the differences between the two. But once again, that was like 20 some seconds, and we're down to another 14,000 polygon model. So now let's talk about how ZRemesher uses the sculptural details or the sculptural properties of your model to generate its topology. So here we have the original model, and when we ran ZRemesher on this, you can see how it actually held or generated topology based on those sculptural qualities on the back of the thorax here. Well, say we just want this to be a nice kind of cylinder shape and not contain any of these kind of ridges or different elements there. Well, simply just take your starting model and then just scrub these details out. So this is just using the clay buildup brush here, and then just smooth. I'm just evening the surface flow on the model, so scrubbing out those sculptural details that were generated. Now after you have your model kind of smooth out like this, when you run ZRemesher again, it's going to give you new topology on that area of the model there, and it's actually going to take all these kind of loops out, so it's just going to give you this nice kind of cylinder shape. So it's looking at the actual sculptural properties of your model to generate the topology. Now this also works in reverse, so say if I wanted some kind of cylinder geometry kind of flowing through here, just come in and sculpt that in really quick. So I'm just going to sculpt these here, and now when I run ZRemesher, it's going to give you these nice kind of rings of topology after it processes. So a really quick way of kind of how to control ZRemesher with just your sculptural qualities that you have on your original mesh. So you may have also noticed that over here there's this target polygon count slider. Now right now this is set to 5,000, but when I ran ZRemesher, I'm getting an active point count of around 14,000. So why is this? And this is in relation to this adaptive density option right here. So with this turned on, ZBrush is looking at your model and it's taking this 5,000 polygon count as an estimate. And then if ZBrush thinks it needs more or less detail in certain areas, it's going to go ahead and add that geometry in there. Now sometimes this isn't what you want. You want to hit really close to that 5,000 polygon limit, especially if you need it for a certain target in a game, stuff like that. We'll just turn off this adaptive density here and then run ZRemesher again. And ZRemesher is going to get extremely close to this target polygon count. So I think it's plus or minus by like 1,000 polygons. So if you ever wonder why you have this on target polygon count of 5 but you're getting 14,000 or so, it's because this adaptive density option is turned on. So with it off, you can see I got to 5,380. So extremely close to that target polygon count there. So I'm just going to put that adaptive slider back on, undo, and then just run ZRemesher again. So now we're going to talk about this adaptive size slider right here. Now this adaptive size slider controls the density of the polygons that ZRemesher is going to create. So by default at 50, you're going to notice that it's still looking for that sculptural detail. So you're going to get really a lot of density in areas where you have fine sculptural detail and larger areas of density where you had those large details. Well, sometimes you may want this to be almost really even topology across the surface. So more squares or squarish topology across the entire model, and kind of remove these kind of areas of rectangles and things like that. Especially if you want to sculpt, say, like panel lines or things like that on your model and kind of avoid some of that stair stepping that may occur with uneven topology. So if we take this adaptive slider and turn it down to 0 and then run ZRemesher again, ZRemesher is going to try to hold a square format for all the topology across the surface. So you're going to notice it's going to take a lot of these kind of rectangles and smaller areas of geometry and evenly distribute it across the entire mesh. So you can see it's tried to hold that kind of square format across the entire model. And you can especially notice it here in the legs. So you can see we have a pretty even density of topology there, and in the wings, so where we had all those kind of small rectangular shapes, now it's really square throughout the entire model. So a lower version of, or a lower number on this adaptive size slider is going to give you more even topology, and then a higher version is going to allow ZBrush to kind of pick and choose where it wants the density of topology to be. So moving on, I'm going to change the adaptive size option back to 50, undo, and then hit Control N to clear that other guy out, and then just ZRemesh this model one more time. So now we're going to talk about the curve functionality in use with ZRemesher. So you may be used to using curves to kind of generate polygon flow on your model with previous versions of ZBrush. And this functionality is the same inside of ZBrush 4R6. So if we take our model like so, and then we open the brush menu with B, isolate by the letter Z, we can select this ZRemesher Guides brush. Now with this brush selected, we can actually come in on our model and draw curves out. So if I just draw a simple circle right here, and then come over and now hit ZRemesh, ZRemesher is going to try to give me a polygon flow based around those curves. So it's going to look at the sculptural details of the rest of the model, but then if there's any curves on the model, it's going to try to generate a polygon flow based around that curve. So you're going to notice here I now have this cylindrical shape in this section of the model right here, and where before, where I had none of those curves drawn, I was getting this nice kind of horizontal and vertical structure. So if you ever need to add different elements on your model like so, you can just draw a curve out and it'll hold it and then run ZRemesher, and it's going to try to generate the polygon flow around those curves. So these curves are oftentimes used as well to generate different areas of jointing for your model for, say, animation purposes. So I'm going to undo these two here and then just hit Control N to clear the other guy out. So with these curves, you can actually start drawing them on your model to establish a polyflow for joints. So if I drag one out here and then hold Shift, ZBrush is going to give me this nice kind of loop around that section of the model. So you could come through and just start dragging and holding Shift, and you'll start generating these loops around those areas where you want joints or polygon flow to be on your model. Now this process takes a little bit of time, especially if you need to go across the entire model and you have a lot of stuff like this around it. But ZBrush has this option under the stroke palette in the curve functions here called Frame Mesh. Now with Frame Mesh, it's going to look at your model, and if you have border, polygroups, or creased edges, it's going to generate a curve around those areas when you click this button. Now inside of ZBrush 4R6, there is a new brush called the Crease Curve brush. So if we hit B and then isolate by the letter C, there's this nice crease curve brush right here. Now what's this going to do, just going to hit OK there, is when you hold Control and Shift, it's going to give you this kind of slice guide here, similar to the slice you're kind of used to. But one thing you'll notice is when you drag it on your model here, you can hold spacebar to move it around. When you let it go, it's going to just give you a crease in that section of the model. Now, unlike normal slice 2, you'll notice that it only sliced this section of the model, so it didn't shoot the slice across the entire model. So with this, I can now go through the entire model just holding Control and Shift and just slice up those different areas. So extremely fast way to establish these joint elements. So just coming through Control and Shift and just dragging out to get these kind of creases set up. Now once I have these creases established on my model, I can now go back up to that stroke menu, go to the curve function, turn off border and polygroup, and just leave that creased edge option on. And now if I hit frame mesh, it's going to give me a curve across all those creased edges. So a real quick way to establish those lines to kind of help ZRemesher establish a polygon flow across your model. Now this curve strength slider over here is going to tell ZBrush how close to follow those curves that you drew on the model. So a lower number is going to allow ZBrush to kind of loosely use those as guides, and then a higher number will allow ZBrush to kind of adhere as close as possible to those actual curves on your model. And then after you're done, you just hit ZRemesh and it will ZRemesh and give you a polygon flow based on all those curves. So now we've discussed the different versions of symmetry. We've also talked about how ZRemesher looks at the sculptural details of your model to generate topology. We've talked about this target polygon count, the adaptive density option, the adaptive size, and the curve strength. Now we're going to talk about this use polypaint mesh density. So I'm just going to undo back to my original mesh here. Now this polypaint mesh density allows you to paint areas of your model where you want more or less density using the colorized information on the model. So to use this, you just come over here and click use polypaint. Now when you click it and then update your scene in the model, you're going to notice that your model has now had colorized turned on, and it has this nice kind of pink hue across the surface. Now the color that's applied to the model right now is based on this slider over here, this color density slider. So a color density of 2, which is going to give you 2 times the information, or 2 times the amount of density in the area, is going to give you this pink color. And then if you change it to say 4 and update your screen, you can see it's going to give you this bright red. So this is going to allow us to paint colors on our model based on this density slider, and it's going to give ZBrush a certain color to paint with. So we don't have to mess with any of the color stuff over here. It's all controlled through this density slider right here. So to start off, we're just going to come and I'm just going to set it to 2 just to get back to that kind of pink color here. And I'm going to make sure the standard brush is selected. So I'm going to hit B to open up my brush palette, hit S to isolate by the letter S, and then find the standard brush. Now with the standard brush selected, I'm going to make sure that I just have RGB turned on and Z-add is turned off. So now if I paint on my model now with this, you're going to notice that it's going to start painting this pink color on the surface of the model. And the rest of the model is going to turn back to this kind of white color. So white is the neutral area where the density is going to stay at 0 or 1 basically. So this pink area is going to give me 2 times the density, so I can just paint around this area here to give me 2 times the amount of density in that area. And then if I want to say less density in a certain part, I'm going to put it down to 0.25. So say I don't want this area to have any real sculptural details. I want it to be very low res geometry after I run ZRemesher. So I'm just going to come through and paint with this, and at a 0.25 density, it tells ZBrush to render it with this blue color. So this blue color is going to tell ZBrush, or tell ZRemesher to generate a 0.25 density of topology in that section. And then we're going to crank the density back up to 4, and we're just going to give a little more density than 10 is here. So this is going to tell ZBrush we want 4 times the amount of detail there. Now you can see I kind of mispainted and painted some red over here. Well, to get rid of that, we just change this color density back down to 1, and that's going to give you that white color. And so now you can just paint any areas you may have missed out. Now another thing, after you have these kind of density areas set up, it sometimes helps to kind of smooth the transition between the two colors. So right now we're going from a 4 times density to a 1 time density. So the amount of topology, or the change in topology that's going to happen here, is going to be pretty harsh. So we want to go in now and kind of just smooth this out a little bit to kind of ease that transition. So if we hold shift and get the smooth brush, just make sure Z add is off again and just make sure RGB is on. And so now we can hold shift and just kind of smooth those areas out along those borders. So the transition between those densities is going to happen a little bit smoother. So just quickly just coming in and smoothing that out a little bit on the model. Now after you have those areas painted in, you just come over here and run ZRemesher. And you're going to notice the density change, that this is going to have 1 times density, this is going to be 0.25 density, this is going to be 4 times the density, and this is going to be 2 times the density. So we're just going to run that really quick. So now if we turn polyframes on over here, you can see how that color information from that color density slider has actually changed the actual topology, or the density of the topology that ZRemesher generated. So here we have the area that was 1x, and then we had the 0.25, and then if you look at the antenna, we've got 4 times the density up there, and then around the eye we have 2 times the density. So a real quick way to kind of go through your model and just paint using this color density slider and the standard brush with RGB turned on to generate those different areas of density. So this especially works really well for hands and faces and parts of your model that you may want a little more density over other areas. Continuing on, I'm going to turn off poly paint here and then just go back to the original version of the model here and run ZRemesher again. So now we're on to the ZRemesher grand finale. So not only can you control ZRemesher with all these different options over here, but you can also ZRemesh on only visible geometry. So here I have my model in just the side view, and I just turn polyframes on. And now I want to make sure I have select rectangle selected. So I'm just going to hit B for the brush menu, hit S to isolate by the letter S, and then find select rectangle, which is R. And I'm just going to hit OK. Now I'm going to hold Control and Shift and just drag the screen box out. I'm just going to isolate this one part of the lake here. So just this portion right here of the mesh. Now if I run ZRemesher on this now, as you can see, it just ZRemeshed that part of the model that was visible. So it left everything else the original density it was, and it gave me new topology in that area that I had visible. Now another thing you'll notice here is that it's actually joined the model together with the other one. So if I just take smooth and smooth this out, you can see that ZBrush has gone through and actually joined that area together. So it's held that edge from the border of the visible, and it's added new geometry in there to merge those together. So this is extremely powerful. So say if you have had part of your model and you're working on it and you find out you need a little more density in a certain area, you can just hide that portion and then ZRemesh it, and it's going to give you more density in there to kind of sculpt with. So say now you have another area of your model, say this part through here, and you want to keep these borders exactly where they are. So you want to add new topology into the middle areas here, but you need to hold these outer borders precisely. Say you have animation constraints and you need this exact edge loop on the model, but you want to add more topology in between. So if you come over here and turn on this freeze border option and then click ZRemesh, ZRemesher is going to hold that border exactly. So you can see it's still kept that entire border. It's added new topology in between, but it's added extra geometry to support that border edge. So that border will not change, but you still get that added topology in between. Now there's also another option, which is freeze groups, which is going to look at the borders of all the groups. So it's going to look at this border and then this border between here. I'm just going to smooth that a little bit. And it's going to hold those border groups and then add new topology in between. So if I just turn that on and then hit ZRemesher, you're going to see that it kept all those polygroup borders. So it's kept this one extremely clean all the way around it, and it's added just new topology in between those border edges. And if I undo, you can see the actual change between the two. So it's actually kept that polygon border exact, and it hasn't changed it at all. So another quick little feature inside of ZRemesher to kind of add density to certain parts of your model and not destroy areas of topology that you want to keep. Well, that concludes the information on ZRemesher. So happy ZBrushing, and stay tuned for more videos on Z Classroom.